fun and a great opportunity for us to share with you a little bit of our trips to Liberia through Pastoral Leadership Institute International. We've taken 4 trips, and it's a 4-year process, and so we'll tell you a little bit about that. We'll give you just a little bit of a background about Liberia if you're not familiar, but with such a strong relationship here with Liberia, most of you know these things, but just to kind of review it a little bit, we saw some of the horrors of what they've gone through, and we'll be able to talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the program that we had with them over the 4 years, and then what we'll do is we'll talk about some of the things about our time there that was significant and meaningful, and then of course we'll open it up for any of your questions. So to start with, let's talk a little bit about the country of Liberia. There it is in West Africa. The small map gives you a little bit of a location there. It is just north of the equator, and you feel it. It was not an unusual thing for it to be 85, 90 degrees with 85 or 90% humidity, and the pop-up shower that would just completely drench you in a moment. It was that is their location in the world. But maybe more than just the location was the history of Liberia. As many of you are aware, Liberia, the country of Liberia, came about through the return of American slaves. And these American slaves were given the opportunity to return to Africa. And I think that the thinking was that, well, they're just going to go back home and everything's going to be just fine. The problem was these people who had been subjugated by the white people turned around in Liberia and subjugated the native peoples. And so when they formed the country of Liberia, they patterned it after America. Even the Liberian flag looks kind of like an American flag. Their government system mirrors the systems in America. And you'll even notice if you look at the different names of streets and towns, you'll notice that many of them have famous Americans in the bases.
Like Monrovia.
Like Monrovia.
Which, James Monroe.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a country patterned after America, for the better and for the worse. Because what happened is you had Americo-Liberians, and these Americo-Liberians had lots of power, and there was this divide that existed between the Americo-Liberians and the native peoples. And for about 100 years, that divide was a source of tension, but really not more than that. But then after that 100 years or so, the native peoples were rising, and it didn't take too long after that for war to break out. And when war did break out, it was nasty, because you didn't just have one native peoples, you had many. And you had all sorts of warlords who were vying for power. And so the civil war in Liberia was a terrible conflict that the stories that we would hear would be, you would be living your regular day out in the village, and then the rebels would come. And you wouldn't even know which rebels they were. All you knew was to run into the bush for your life. And many stories were of people running in every direction and never seeing each other again. It was pretty terrible. The picture that I have behind me is a location that figures heavily into the history that I just told you. This is Providence Island. And Providence Island was the place, one of the places, where they loaded up the slave ships. So if you think back in history to when they were gathering up all of these Africans and putting them onto these slave ships in deplorable conditions, and then heading off to sea, and I forget what the percentage was that would die, but many of them would die on the trip. Okay, this was the place in Liberia where those slave ships would have docked, and the slaves would have, the to-be slaves would have been loaded onto those ships. Well, wouldn't you know it, when those, I don't know, great-great-grandchildren, or whatever it would have been, came back to Liberia, guess where they landed? Providence Island. And that's why it was called Providence Island. As God was providing. Even though it's a place that has this terrible history, it would be a place that God would provide for the people. We had the chance to visit Providence Island, it's pretty run down now, but there was a tree there that was the tree that was there when the slaves were loaded up on the ships. And we'd always look to that tree to see their heritage going all the way back. And since now then, that tree I think got hit by lightning or something like that.
Yeah.
It's not as glorious as it was when we saw it, but just a great big old tree. We had the opportunity when we were there, our first year, to do a little bit more touring. And when you're touring a third world country that has been through war and disease, it's just something. It really grabs your heart. Well, our guide, who happened to be the bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Liberia, Amos Bolay, had the opportunity for us to tour what used to be a 5-star hotel at the top of a cliff in Monrovia. It was a beautiful, beautiful place before the war. I think he had to do a little bribing to get us in there. There was a security guard who wasn't too sure he wanted to take us, but then was suddenly quite happy to do so. Okay, that happens. And by the way, that is actually the way things work in a lot of ways. In this country and countries around the world, it's just a matter of, how much are you willing to pay to change someone's mind. And so the bishop was quite literally doing what he had to do in their culture to give us a look. And so what I have here is just a short video from the very top, okay, of this 5-star hotel. And this would be where, if you were a traveling dignitary, all right, if the President of the United States were to come to Liberia back in the day, he would have dined and walked around on this balcony. Okay, let me give you a look at it now.
How many stories up were you?
Oh, how many was it?
Well, we were on a cliff, and then I think the hotel probably was another 8, probably.
8 stories.
Yeah, about 8 stories. I stop it here because, see that little peninsula that kind of juts into the bay? That is a part of Monrovia called West Point. Now, don't think of a military academy when you think of that. Think of a slum town so closely packed together, there really aren't true roads that go through it. Okay? This is where the poorest of the poor of Liberia live, and basically just about everybody's poor. Okay? This is the place where Ebola started in Liberia. You can imagine them living so closely together, people not having proper sanitation, and it just exploding. So, not only did we have the chance to see this bombed out hotel, but from that viewpoint, we got to gaze upon the place where Ebola started in Liberia. So I'll finish the video here.
And you could tell it really was by our standards, it was a very nice hotel
Yep.
at its time.
Yeah, it was beautiful. The architecture, everything. Yeah, it would have been something to see in the day. A little taste of what traffic is like. Let's get that going. This was every day.
Yeah.
Notice the cars come the other way. Yeah, that was nice. That was the way it was. And if it wasn't a car traveling the other way, it was a bike. Later, when they were working on that road and the road got better, they were motorbikes everywhere. You were constantly traveling with motorbikes coming by you, and those were taxis. People would use those as taxis. They would. So that was life, and they don't have emission standards. So by the time we would get back to our hotel, our lungs would be burning with the fumes of the vehicles. And that's just the way it is, okay? And that's the way it is for them every day. So let's talk a little bit about how we got into this. You see, this all got started long before I ever knew there was an Immanuel Lutheran Church in Elmhurst, Illinois. I was back in St. Paul, Minnesota, and long before we took this trip, I was working with Liberians. There were roughly 30,000 Liberians in the Twin Cities, and one of them was deeply invested in our church. His name is Losini Fofana. Fofana is a Muslim name. Fofana was raised as a Muslim and was actually being trained by his family to be an imam. He became a Christian during the war in Liberia by simply opening up a Bible and by the influence of his friends who kept inviting him to church. It was a Lutheran church that he ended up getting connected to in Liberia. When he came to America, he was in San Francisco, and it was a Lutheran church that took him in. He just simply went up to the door and said, "Hi, I'm here and you're Lutherans, help me." And they did. There was a pastor who actually helped him. Years later, by the way, we actually had an event at Bethel where we were inviting people from PLI, the American version, and we were telling our story. Fofana and I were telling our story, and the guy across the way said, "Hey, wait a second, I gave you a coat when you were in San Francisco." And Fofana's like, "I remember you." And they got him and they gave him a great big hug, and it was just like, what just happened? Yeah, so the guy actually showed up at Bethel and like randomly met Fofana, and it was just awesome. So this picture is significant for us because Lucidi Fofana went through the Ethnic Immigrant Institute of Theology at Concordia Seminary. It was a 4-year process where I mentored him through the coursework to become a pastor. And this was the day he received his call from the seminary to be a pastor at Bethel Lutheran Church. So I think that's significant. I was just there in that very spot just days ago, and thought that would be significant for us as well, as we're considering calling a candidate from Concordia Seminary. So with that history, and then also some other connections, maybe explain the connections a little bit that we have with PLI International.
So, my sister's husband, so Scott Rishi, Dr. Scott Rishi, he's my brother-in-law. So he had been working with PLI here in the United States for many years, very good friends with the director. And when they wanted to expand overseas, he became the director of PLI International. They knew of our work with Liberians and thought it would be a good match for us to go with them to do training in Liberia because we knew of the people and their culture.
So it was good in a lot of ways. It was really God bringing a lot of things together. Not only do we have the experience with Liberians, but it becomes like a family getaway at the same time. It was pretty great that way. Let's talk a little bit about PLI. PLI stands for Pastoral Leadership Institute. It is an organization that was founded in America because one of the challenges that pastors faced was that they were being asked to lead a congregation of people, not just preach and teach and administer the sacraments, but truly to lead this entire congregation. And a lot of the training of pastors in the seminary didn't focus upon the best practices of being a leader. Okay? And so Pastoral Leadership Institute saw that and wanted to fill the gap. And they did so faithfully for a long time and still do to this day. Well, one of the things that happened, along with Scott Rishi, I think he was a big part of this, was they saw that America was not the only ones who had this need. That church bodies around the world had pastors who were more than happy to lead a congregation, just didn't know how. And when I talk about leadership, I'm not just talking about business practices. We're talking about leadership as Jesus led, to be a humble servant leader who is aptly working together with the people and deploying them for ministry. Okay, so what they did is they started bringing this overseas, and it was such a hit with these church bodies, they started getting asked by other church bodies to go, and they eventually created this entire section of PLI devoted to spreading this internationally. And that's what Dr. Scott Rishi and Lori have been doing for years, probably 6 years, 8 years, something like that, maybe more than that, maybe 10. They work in 12 countries now around the world, and they always go under the invitation of the official church body. So we were there under the invitation of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Liberia and their pastor, or their bishop, Amos Bolay. So that's PLI. Let's talk a little bit about the program. The PLI is a 4-year process where it builds upon itself. And so we would be there for roughly a week. The actual teaching was less than a week. And this is how the training went. So the first year was laying the foundation. That Jesus' mission is our mission. Now, you look at that and you say, of course it is. Well, maybe not. A lot of the pastors that PLI works with have never been to a seminary. And they became the pastor because they were the most spiritually apt in their village to do so. And I praise God for every man who is willing, in the midst of their village, on top of their current job, to lead a congregation. These men were absolutely dedicated to their churches. But it was very important for us to establish that as their framework. Along the way, we talked about their surroundings, their culture, and talked about the capabilities of their people, and our commitment to the mission. And somewhere when you put together your culture and the capabilities of your people and the mission, you get focus on what are we supposed to be doing as a congregation, right? It has to be working with your culture, it has to work with the people you have, but it has to be focused on the mission. And so that's what we focused on that first year. Year 2 was all about change. Yeah, Lutherans We're not, yeah, American Lutherans, German Lutherans, we're not the only ones who deal with challenges with change. What we talked about with this was the fact that Jesus from the very beginning is asking people to change. Remember the first words out of his mouth? Repent. Guess what that means? Change. Okay? So it's actually fundamental to the Christian faith for people to change. And so we talked about that. And there were a lot of pastors who, after that first year, this was even pretty amazing. They would be telling us, we came back the second year, they would be telling us the very words that we spoke to them a year before. And telling us all about how they taught their congregations and they taught other pastors and these things were spreading. And then we came and said, yeah, we need to change. And they're like, yes, we do. It was great. It was great. They were ready to talk about change. And we were ready to talk about all the challenges that come along with change. And the feeling of loss that comes along with change. And all of that. And it was really great. Their eyes were wide open. In fact, we have a video that we'll show in just a little bit that was taken right after this year. And you'll hear them talk about what it meant for them to learn about change and how to lead change in their congregations. Year 3, now that they're changing and they're adjusting toward God's mission, now you got to make sure everybody's involved. Nobody's excluded. Everybody's in the mission. Doesn't matter who they are, but everybody's involved. Okay? And that was profound for them. In their culture, the pastor is very, very high. The people are way down here. So who's important? The pastor's important. And everybody does what the pastor says. Okay? And part of our job was knocking him down a few notches, bringing up the people. And as we'll talk about also, we're bringing up the women, particularly, and their wives. Last year, what we talked about was multiplying leaders. The pastor cannot do it by himself. That applies here, by the way, too, so that you know. The pastor cannot do it by himself. And so, if you're getting everybody involved in the mission, how do you raise up leaders from within the congregation, according to their giftedness, to then do far more than you could do with just one guy who gets up and preaches every week? Okay? And so that was also a profound thing. You could see how this process allowed them to grow and to be nurtured. And it was fabulous just to teach it. So here's that video I was telling you about that was shot after the second year of teachings.
Change. When you want to carry on change, don't expect it to always be your way. No. You gotta take other people's suggestion. You gotta look at the time involved. You gotta be patient. You gotta convince others. Because if you don't do that, then you will always be afraid of the cause. Other people will never want to listen to you because you are not including them into your change. That one. Number two, because you are not respecting their view into your change. Their view may not make sense.
I'm so impressed about PLR because what is happening now? The topic under discussion this year, I'm so impressed about it because there are a lot of things that pastors encounter nowadays, and I believe from this particular teaching, under the topic change will be a great change everywhere. So we believe that with this training, we know that our ministries will grow. With this training, especially this topic, this conference, talk about change, why change, and what you're going to change. There are just things that you cannot change, and there are things that you can change. But God is the one who will guide us in it. So we want to say that after this workshop or this conference, our relationship with our wives, our ministries, are going to grow. Especially those of our brothers and sisters that we far away from here. We have our Israel ministries, about 100 plus congregations across the country, and the pastors are here, their wives are here, they are learning. We believe that this training is going to help us a whole lot to take the message out to our people, and our people will receive it, and they will be so glad, and our churches will grow.
And I make her to know how we can take care of our wife, and our wife, they are not slave to us, and they are not there to just carry water or share or whatsoever we feel like doing to them, but I make her to know that our wife, our helper, they are our advisor, and they're there to help her build the ministry. And then we should be able, I make her to understand through the teaching that we should be able to listen to our wife view. We should listen to their view when it comes to relationship with God or building God's mission. We should be able to listen to their view.
But to do something and go out to the community and have to bring people back in the church and change their lives or something like that, that's what I learned. It's not just on you, not just you being changed, but to use that, whatever we learn here, and take it back out to our community, to our churches, to different various groups within the church, and let them know that we need to do something to change the surroundings.
This workshop, I can say thanks to all of you who have supported this workshop, and we want you to not stop supporting it, because everything you give to us, it counts, and everything that you support in the ministry to Africa, it is going a mighty long way. So I want to say a big thank you to all of you for all of your support and your prayers. We say keep helping to build up our church in Liberia. God bless you.
All right, he's talking to you when he says that. Because this church has been supporting the work of PLI International, and that's my buddy Simon. Simon is a future leader of that church. Let me give you a little picture of what we kind of daily life, what it was like. This is the sanctuary that we would spend time in. You can see it was open air, no glass on those windows. It would not be an unusual thing for a bird or a lizard to fly through or run through. Here's another look. We would run into some challenges every once in a while because when it would rain, so buckets. Wow. All right. But here's the crazy thing about that. In 4 years, we were never rained out. It would rain during our breaks. It would rain at lunch. It would kind of kind of drizzle on us, but never once did we have to stop one of our sessions because of rain. Actually, that particular rainstorm that we showed you stopped just minutes before our next session. All right, and we knew it wasn't a coincidence, that God was opening the door for us to do our work. Here were your accommodations. This was the nicest toilet on the entire campus. There was no running water. The bucket to the right was for flushing. So they'd fill the bucket, and when you flushed, you just poured it in. And we got to use this one. The participants in the conference did not. So they had the pit toilets. Yeah, so we were the honored ones, so we got to use the nice toilet. So just to let you know.
The Western toilet.
The Western toilet, as they would call it, yes.
Why is the toilet seat on this?
I don't know, because it's broken.
It broke up.
It's just broken.
You have to bring one next time.
Yeah, I know. Just make do with what you got. Judy talks all about sending things over to Liberia. During our second year, one of those shipments, not one of ours, but a shipment from Lutheran Grain Train, arrived right in the middle of our teaching. They thought it was coming a week later, suddenly just showed up. And so, just to let you know, when you do send things, when you gather books or supplies, it actually gets there. So there are people carrying desks on their heads throughout that entire session because desks had arrived and they were going to get distributed to the different schools. Also down the street and all around the corner were the mosques. So plenty of Islam going on there. There is probably about an equal number of Muslims as there are Christians in the country. So many people who adhere to the Islamic faith and are going to Islamic schools, much like we have our Christian schools. One of the highlights of Pastoral Leadership Institute is to build the relationship between the pastor and his wife. Very, very important, something that PLI is known for here, and something that we would teach on every single time. So I'm going to pass this over to Ruth to talk a little bit about the teaching with pastors and their wives.
Sure, so here you can see they're actually sitting next to each other. Oftentimes during the regular sessions they wouldn't sit together, but actually by year 4 they did tend to sit together more frequently throughout all of the sessions. We also had sessions that we would we would separate the men from the women, because that gave us the opportunity to talk through things with the women that, as women know, there are things you don't want to talk about in front of your husbands. So we would take that opportunity, and we would still go through the same leadership training, but specifically talking about how their gifts and what their roles were. And many of the women really appreciated that opportunity, not only to hear the teaching for themselves, but also to connect with the other women there. Many of them feel very isolated. Their husbands get to go off to conferences, but then they stay home and take care of their family. And this was an opportunity to meet other women who were going through the same things that they were going through, and it's very powerful. The sessions on marriage were good. It kind of opened their eyes to, in their culture, he talked about the pastor being very high, and the husband is very high. And so it was kind of showing, women have value too. And look at how they support you and how they do these things. And oftentimes the women wouldn't even feel that they had that value. But we were showing you are leaders. So look at in your life, in your leader in your home, your leader in your community, and building them up to be partners with their husbands in what they're doing for the mission. So here, we were in a different classroom every year, but you can see they're sitting in those green chairs that were in the main room. And so the first year, we said, men, we would like you to carry your wife's chair to the classroom. And they were like, and so then one guy was like, with this plastic chair, I will carry her chair. and then all these looking at each other, and then it became a thing. It was like a thing of pride. I am carrying your chair here. That was great, and it just. And then we would hear stories from the men coming back the next year. Wow, my marriage is so different now. Like we talk about money instead of me just saying, here's $5. We talk about our money, how we're going to spend our money, and how we're going to make decisions together. It was the fact that we didn't ask for this feedback; they gave it, and so that was really, really wonderful. Here is a little taste of my favorite part was when every session the women loved to sing together, and so here's a little taste of what it sounded like. Loud enough that the men could hear us. So that was fun and beautiful, and it would just set our sessions off really nicely. The first 2 years we struggled a lot with illiteracy. Because of the war, many of these women were completely illiterate, and so PLI's training in other countries is very different. We had to adapt our curriculum because of the high level of literacy among the women. So all of their husbands are pastors, and so they, by definition, are literate. They have to be able to study the scriptures and preach on it. And so there was another big gap there, right? So they have educated husbands, uneducated wives, and so it was very apparent right away we needed to adapt the curriculum, because it was take notes, read this question, no. And the other difference here was that we did not have an interpreter because they speak English. Well, they speak Liberian English. And what we discovered in the first 2 years was that, well, we sound weird to them.
Sure.
And the further they were away from Monrovia, many of these couples had traveled far, far away from the bush, the places, the more rural areas. And so then their accents were thicker and our accents were thicker to them. And they couldn't understand us, even though we were both speaking English. So we requested that we have an interpreter. So it was a very interesting experience because Comfort was our interpreter for year 3 and 4. And she's a young lady who's in deaconess training, and she was fabulous. But it's very interesting when you're being interpreted to actually understand what the other person is saying. So, especially for my sister Lori, she found it very difficult because she's used to, okay, I'm going to say my thing, and then I'm going to gather my thoughts for the next thing I'm going to say. But instead, you're like, oh, how did she say that? Oh, that's interesting. So, but it's very interesting, but so helpful, and the women were so pleased that we even brought her into the sessions with the men, because then they could understand both in the time that they were with us as well as the times with the men. So it was a real blessing, and it's a way to show that we appreciated and valued them understanding what we were saying, rather than we're just going to push through. And so it was really, really good, and she was fantastic, and it was so fun to work with her on that. And here, as you can see, I'm wearing this dress that they gave us at that time. That's how they show their appreciation, is they like to share a little bit of their culture with us. So we got that, and you can see the other white girl in the back. That's my niece Hannah. She came along that year. She also made that video that you watched She came along, she had done her undergraduate in international business, and so she was exploring different options in her life at that time, and this was an opportunity to come along and see what international life is like. So and they gave her a nice garb, and they were so excited this year when we came back and showed, she had gotten married last May, and she had gotten married to an African American, and when they saw that, he's one of us. Your daughter married a black man, you know, and it like increased the, like, they almost started crying. It was shocking to them, and they said, you know, you came here and you told us you loved us, and, you know, we always kind of wonder, but when we see that your daughter married a black man, one of us, one of our skin, that's how they said
That's how
it,
you say it, yeah.
one of our skin, we know that you really do love us and you're not prejudiced against us. And so it was, wow, God even used that to help our relationships with them. So here's a picture in the classroom for this year. So this year they bought matching shirts for everybody to wear as like a memento of the conference, and that's why we're all wearing yellow. And this was our craft. So we were teaching about you know, how you raise people up, and so we used the example in this craft of how do you train somebody. So first they watch, and then, you know, you have them do it, and then you help them, and then they can do it, and then they can show others. And so that was part of what we were doing there. And all right, it's time to turn it back over to you.
Okay.
Questions?
Yes, go ahead.
Did the men lose face because they were helping their wives?
They thought they were.
They thought they were
Well,
helping, they
initially,
thought they were...
but then when they saw so when the leaders, you know, the brave men that said, I'm gonna do it, then they all followed suit because then they weren't losing face.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
What did that do to their relationship when they went back to their village? What did their...
It made waves. That's what it did, because they're operating in a different way, that it's a kind of counter to their culture, but they were confident enough in it that
Okay.
they were able to say, no, the Bible says this is what we believe, my wife is valuable, she's my partner in ministry, we do this together, and then they ended up being examples to everyone else.
So they...
Yeah.
Okay.
and they're still able to do it in their context. So what their relationship is going to look like is going to be culturally different than our relationship. So it's not to turn them all into Americans
No.
and our values with our marriages and stuff like that, but it was more to build the women up in both their own eyes as well as in the men's eyes to realize their value. Not necessarily that they're going to go and carry chairs for them every day, but more of, we really want you to realize the value of this partner that God has given you. And it's going to look different in every country that PLI goes to, right? And so, but it's again, we're very careful to be culturally sensitive. So it's not, well, here, we're the Americans, we know it all, so we're trying to turn you into us. But more of, realize the value and how that looks in your culture is going to be different than how it looks in our culture. And that's okay. But honoring and respecting each other in the marriage relationship rather than viewing one as lower.
Is that changed relationship from the pastor to the pastor's wife an obstacle to evangelism?
Not that we heard.
No. If anything, it opened new doors. I mean, the whole training was to knock these guys down in some ways, in their own eyes, right? It really was. And they knew it. And they absolutely knew it. But what they realized was that Jesus wants us to be servants of all. And when they saw themselves there, they were actually able to be better pastors and better husbands and to lift up the congregation. And so, yeah, I feel like they saw right away that it was a benefit. The challenge is actually incorporating it into your life when the whole culture is still operating a different way.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And actually that goes kind of to the picture I've got up here. Look at how engaged they are. Okay. This was the year when we were talking about change. And we would often teach, and then they would get together in small groups and then really talk out, what does this look like for us? Every single guy is leaning in. Every guy is, they're really wanting to figure out how to do this in their own setting. One of the other things we talked about was getting everyone involved in the mission. And you can imagine a country that has had war and with cultural and tribal divides, that there is plenty of disunity. Plenty of opportunities to say, we're going to do it this way and you're going to do it that way. And even though we teach the same thing and believe all the same things, well, we're just different. Okay? We don't know anything about that in America, right? Okay, so that happens around the world. And it was fabulous when we talked about unity and the importance of unity and getting everyone involved in the mission. There were conversations that would pop up. Well, how can we do this better? How can we bring people in who aren't necessarily a part of us right now? And it was amazing to watch how everything we taught met them right where they were. And God had just opened the door for each one of those. One example of that is something I'm going to tell a little bit of. I may not do the whole thing, but there was one example that really shone for the people. Okay, and it was an example they called Pastor A and Pastor B. Well, let's at least get it started. Okay, because we are very fortunate to have two former pastors of this church right here who I'm going to ask to come up to the front. That's right, come on up. That's right. The only two former pastors, you guys, this was not planned.
Okay.
All right. And so what we would do, this was our example for how to get everybody involved in the mission. We had Pastor A and Pastor B. Okay? Now, Pastor A and Pastor B both love their churches. They're very well-trained pastors. They're dedicated to the mission. And Pastor A loves Jesus so much that he goes and he finds someone and shares Jesus with them, and he becomes a part of their church. So why don't you go find one of the people this day and just bring him up. Come on up. All right.
I love you so much.
And this is great. And this person is baptized, and we love the fact that they're baptized. And now Pastor A has a bigger church. Pastor B also loves Jesus and loves the church, and he goes and finds somebody and brings them into the church. All right, come on. And this person is baptized. Okay. Now, Pastor A is working very hard, and he loves Jesus so much that he's going to actually go out and do it again. So go out and go and find somebody and bring him into the church. This guy is really working hard, and he loves Jesus so much.
Please come.
And this person is baptized. This is great. We're so thankful for Pastor A. He works really hard. These people are being taught, and they're learning and growing in Jesus. Pastor B, however, has discipled this person so that this person also has a heart for going out and caring for people and sharing the gospel. So both of them go out, and each of them finds someone to bring to Jesus. All right.
I'll make you come up.
Sit. All right. So they're both baptized. All right. This is great. And then Pastor A, you look tired. Okay, but you're working hard. You're doing a great job. Go out and find somebody else. And this person is baptized. We're so happy. We're so thankful. You guys are being taught, and you are loving your church, because Pastor is a great pastor. He's just loving it. Pastor B has taught all these people how to go out and reach people with Jesus, and so they all go out and find somebody else. Go out and find somebody else. All four. Go and find somebody else. Okay. All right. And they're all baptized, and we're so happy about that. Okay, guess what is going to happen next over here? Pastor B goes finds one more, but I'm going to stop it right here because we're running out of time. Already you can see what's going on. Right? How many do we have on this side? We have 4. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so we've got 9 over there. And so what we did is we continued it until everybody in the entire place was up front. And guess what it looked like? Pastor A had a handful. Pastor B had a church full. Okay? And this was the most powerful example for all the people. Because it displayed what happens when we are willing to all participate in the mission. If everybody is out there, if everybody is sharing, if everybody is reaching somebody, look what happens. All right, and the pastor's job is to equip them all to be sent. Not just to feed them and run himself ragged going out and getting more. Okay, they really related to that. So, thank you all. You can head back to your seats. All right. So a few things just before it is time. I do need to run away and go back upstairs. But this is the group. Roughly 50 pastors and then their wives, and so our attendance would range anywhere from like 85 to better than 100. So it was a great conference. Every one of them received a certificate each year for the completion. That's very important to them with all of our signatures. A few things of note. The guy in the purple there is Joe Bowe's brother, Thomas. Thomas is both Joe and Thomas are both worked with Lutheran Bible translators. Thomas is doing fabulous work. I'm hearing about people getting baptized in his church all the time. Just a truly awesome brother in the faith. Stop us sometime and we'll tell you the story of how our plane in Sierra Leone got hit by a bird and how we almost died. So, but that's a story for another time. But I've set the stage. It was pretty dramatic. This is my brother Simon. I'm going to show you a little bit. So I had this up here. This is a Liberian handshake. I just have to show you. It's cool. Here we go. There it is. I love the kids in the background. They're like, is he really going to do it? He can do it.
It takes a lot.
Yeah, there's a snap at the end. So this picture, this little carving is of the snap. The moment when you do the little snap at the end of the handshake. So learn the Liberian handshake, and we'll have kind of the secret handshake forever. All right. We ran out of some time. I have to run away, but if you want to stick around for a couple minutes, maybe you can answer a few questions. But I am going to have to run upstairs, and if you need to go, certainly you can. But I've got a worship service to be prepared for.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you. Thank you. But Ruth will aptly answer all of your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor.
So what's next for these men? So this is a 4-year process, and so they have completed the training, and they will continue to meet. So we have them meet in local groups, and so they continue to meet with each other and work through things together. Liberia has just started a seminary, and so many of these men will be going to seminary. And continuing to have additional training that way. So, yes.
What's next for you?
What's next for us? That's a really good question. So, I don't know. But PLI is a 4-year program. They don't tend to extend with the same pastors, so there would be a potential of maybe doing something in Liberia again, but it would have to be with a different group of pastors to continue in that, so. Any other questions?
So what supports are still available for these folks coming from PLI or other organizations outside of Liberia?
Sure, so there are different So there are lots of different supports. There's still work in Liberia through LBT, which is Lutheran Bible Translators, which is like a partner with Wycliffe, if you're familiar with them. There is the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Liberia is a partner church with the LCMS, so they have partner agreements, and aid is sent to them for various different things like helping with the seminary and that sort of thing. And then different churches can also support, kind of like we do with help through with Joe Bowe and that sort of thing. So there are different organizations that come and help in Liberia as well.
Now that cultural change with the men helping the women, that kind of took place in this country, what, in the 50s, 60s? Because men would not do laundry or dishes or change diapers.
Sure. Yeah. In Liberia, unemployment is very high too, so that's another factor into the whole mix of family dynamics and interpersonal dynamics, and it's just a fact that can be a difficult struggle, yes.
Does being a pastor's wife confer additional status in a community?
It does, and that can be actually very isolating because as a pastor's wife, you're viewed as different, and you're not necessarily one, so you're kind of a little bit on a pedestal, but not as high of a pedestal, and, it can make relationships interesting. Some of the things we've heard from some of the women are actually very similar to the challenges pastors' wives have in America, actually. So, yeah. Yes?
I'm just curious, did the pastor have any trouble with his diet,
Actually, it was a fairly easy country to go to because the mainstay for carbohydrate there is rice, and so they don't use a lot of flour there, so he was okay.
Okay,
Yep.
I just wondered about that.
Does the country have a sense of peace now, or is there still an undercurrent of?
There is definitely peace there. They are really struggling, especially this last year. They had a turnover in leadership, and this year they told us that they were in a major recession. And so economically, they've taken some hits. And so that was a big difference between the previous years. It had seemed like they were really building up a lot. And this past year, inflation, so they were talking, like, let's say you had a water bottle, and let's just say that water bottle cost $1 last year. Well, now it's gonna cost $2. So their inflation really had increased over last year, as well as, I don't even know what I was gonna say. But so they were struggling with economic issues this year especially. So, yes.
In their public elections, would they have a problem between the Muslims and the Christians? Their competition?
So I would say it's more tribal than necessarily religious. So it would be, what tribe are you from? And so then you have the intertribal conflicts that way. And usually your tribes also have a religious affiliation. So you're vastly a Muslim tribe, or you're a Christian tribe. And so yes, you do get that conflict, but I don't necessarily think it's because of the religion, more than it's because of the tribal nature. And also, their new president was an acclaimed international soccer star. And so they elected him, the young people elected him thinking he's gonna be great. And so they had a woman president for quite a long time, I'm not sure how many years,
Yeah,
but
2 terms.
2 terms, and then now they had shifted to this gentleman, and so there's been, some interesting things in the transition.
So how do these people who are from a heritage of slavery in the United States fit into the tribal system?
Well, that's really interesting, and that was kind of where the conflict arose. So if you think about the people who were slaves in the US, then they were freed, and then they were given the opportunity to go back to Africa. Well, many of them were not from Liberia. Most of them weren't, and even if they were, they didn't really know where they were from. And so they're called Americo-Liberians, and they have like their own kind of status. You know, they didn't really fit in with the tribes, and so they're their own.
So they're sort of like their own tribe?